Hello, so this is part 2, Perpetual Motion. I put a note in the community post about this poem by Mueller. It's about the excitement of going out on a journey. And probably not the same kind of journey we're about to go on here, but I think these are some people that he knew. Real people, you know, these were all real people. So, page 489, chapter 1, the ships of the archipelago. Scattered from the Bering Strait almost to the Bosphorus are thousands of islands of the spellbound archipelago. They are invisible, but they exist, and the invisible slaves of the archipelago, who have substance, weight, and volume, have to be transported from island to island, just as invisibly and uninterruptedly. And by what means are they to be transported? On what? Great ports exist for this purpose, transit prisons and smaller ports, camp transit points. Sealed steel ships also exist, railroad cars, especially christened Zach cars, pioneer prisoner cars, and out at the anchorages, they are met by similarly sealed, versatile Black Marias, rather than by sloops and cutters. The Zach cars move along on regular schedules, and whenever necessary, whole caravans, trains of red cattle cars, are sent from port to port along the routes of the archipelago. All this is a thoroughly developed system. It was created over dozens of years, not hastily. Well-fed, uniformed, unhurried people created it. The Kaneshma convoy waits at the Moscow Northern Station at 1700 hours on odd-numbered days to accept Black Marias from the Butyrka, Krasnaya, and Taganka prisons. The Ivanova convoy has to arrive at the station at 600 hours on even-numbered days to receive and hold custody transit prisoners for Nerekta, Bridgehead, and Balagoya. All this is happening right next to you. You can almost touch it, but it's invisible, and you can't shut your eyes to it too. At the big stations, loading and unloading the dirty faces takes place far, far from the passenger platform, and is seen only by switchmen and roadbed inspectors. At smaller stations, a blind alleyway between two warehouses is preferred, into which the Black Marias can back so that their steps are flush with the steps of the Zach car. The convict doesn't have time to look at the station to see you, or to look up and down the train. He gets to look only at the steps, and sometimes the lower step is waist high and he hasn't the strength to climb up on it, and the convoy guards who have blocked off the narrow crossing from the Black Maria to the Zach car growl and snarl, "Quick, quick, come on," and maybe even brandish their bayonets. And you, hurrying along the platform with your children, your suitcases and your string bags, are too busy to look closely. Why is that second baggage car hitched onto the train? There is no identification on it, and it is very much like a baggage car. The gratings have diagonal bars, and there is darkness behind them. But then why are soldiers, defenders of the fatherland, riding in it? And why, when the train stops, do two of them march whistling along on either side, peer down under the car? The train starts, and 100 crowded prisoner destinies, tormented hearts, are borne along the same snaky rails, behind the same smoke, past the same fields, posts, and haystacks as you, and even a few seconds sooner than you. But outside your window, even less trace of the grief which has flashed past is left in the air than the fingers leave in water. And in the familiar life of the train, which is always exactly the same, with its slit openable package of bed linen and tea served in glasses with metal holders, could you possibly grasp what a dark and suppressed horror has been born through the same sector of Euclidean space just 3 seconds ahead of you? You are dissatisfied because there are 4 of you in your compartment and it's crowded. And could you possibly believe, and will you possibly believe when reading these lines, that in that same size of compartment as yours, but up ahead in that exact car, there are 14 people, and if there are 25, and if there are 30, the exact car, what a foul abbreviation it is, as for that matter, are all the executioner's abbreviations. They meant to indicate that this was a railroad car for prisoners, for execution, but nowhere except in prison documents has this term caught on and stuck. The prisoners got used to calling this kind of railroad car a stolypin car, or more simply, just a stolypin. As rail travel was introduced more widely in our fatherland, prisoner transport changed their form. Right up to the 90s of the last century, the Siberian prisoner transports moved on foot or by horse cart. As far back as 1896, Lenin traveled to Siberian exile in an ordinary third-class passenger car with free people all around him, and shouted to the train crew that everyone knows that it was intolerably crowded. The painting by Yaroshenko, which everyone knows, Life is Everywhere, shows a fourth-class passenger car equipped in very naive fashion for prisoner transport. Everything has been left just as it is, and the prisoners are traveling just like ordinary people, except that double gratings have been installed on the windows. Cars of this type were used on Russian railroads for a very long time, and certain people remember being transported as prisoners in just such cars in 1927, except the men and women were separated. On the other hand, the S.R. Trushin recalls that even during the Tsar's times, he was transported as a prisoner in a stolypin car, except that, once again going back to legendary times, there were 6 people in a compartment. Probably this type of railroad car really was first used under stolypin. In other words, before 1911, and in the general cadet revolutionary embitterment, they christened it with his name. However, it really became the favorite means of prisoner transport only in the 20s, and it became the universal and exclusive means only from 30s on, when everything in our life became uniform. Therefore, it would be more correct to call it a Stalin car rather than a stolypin car. But we aren't going to argue with the Russian language here. The stolypin car is an ordinary passenger car divided into compartments, except that 5 of the 9 compartments are allotted to the prisoners. Here, as everywhere in the archipelago, half of everything goes to the auxiliary personnel. The guards and compartments are separated from the corridor, not by a solid barrier, but by a grating, which leaves them open for inspection. This grating consists of intersecting diagonal bars, like the kind one sees in station parks. It rises the full height of the car, and because of it, there are not the usual baggage racks projecting from the compartments over the corridor. The windows on the corridor sides are ordinary windows, but they have the same diagonal gratings on the outside. There are no windows in the prisoners' compartments, only tiny barred blinds on the level of the second sleeping shelves. That is why the car has no exterior windows excuse me, and looks like a baggage car. The door into each compartment is a sliding door, an iron frame with bars. From the corridor side, all this is very reminiscent of a menagerie. Pitiful creatures resembling human beings are huddled there in cages, the floors and bunks surrounded on all sides by metal grills, looking out at you pitifully, begging for something to eat and drink. Except that in menageries, they never crowd the wild animals so tightly. According to the calculations of non-prisoner engineers, 6 people can sit on the bottom bunk of a stellar pin compartment, and another 3 can lie in the middle ones, which are joined in one continuous bunk except for the space cut out beside the door for climbing up and getting down. And 2 more can lie on the baggage shelves above. Now, if in addition to these 11 more are pushed into the compartment, the last of whom are shoved out of the way of the door by the jailer's boots as they shut it, then this will constitute a normal complement for a Stolypin prisoner's compartment. 2 huddle, half sitting on each of the upper baggage shelves, another 5 lie on the joined middle level. And they are the lucky ones. These places are won in battle, and if there are any prisoners present from the underworld companionship of thieves, the Blatnia, then it is they who are lying there, and this leaves 13 down below. 5 sit on each of the bunks, and 3 are in the aisle between their legs, somewhere mixing up with the people on the people, and under the people are their belongings. And that is how they sit, their crossed legs wedged beneath them day after day. No, it isn't done especially to torture people. A sentenced prisoner is a laboring soldier of socialism. So why would he be tortured? They need him for construction work. But after all, you will agree will agree that he is not off on a jaunt to visit his mother-in-law, and there is no reason in the world to treat him so well. The people in freedom would envy him. We have problems with their transportation. He'll get there all right, and he won't die on the way either. Since the 50s, when railroad timetables were actually straightened out, the prisoners haven't had to travel in this fashion for a very long time, say a day and a half or 2 days. During and after the war, things were worse. From Petropavlovsk in Kazakhstan and Karaganda, a Stolypin car might be 7 days en route with 25 people in a compartment. From Karaganda to Sverdlovsk, it could be 8 days with up to 26 in a compartment. Even just going from Kubyshev to Chelyabinsk in August 1945, Susie traveled in a Stolypin car for several days, and their compartment held 35 people lying on top of one another, floundering, fighting. And in the autumn of 1946, Timofeyev Razovsky traveled from Petropavlovsk to Moscow in a compartment that had 36 people in it. For several days he hung suspended between other human beings' legs, and his legs did not touch the floor. Then they started to die off. Not right away, true, only on the second day. And the guards hauled their corpses out from under their feet. That way things became less crowded. The whole trip to Moscow continued in this fashion for 3 weeks. Was 36 the upper limit for a Stolypin compartment? I have no evidence available on 37 or higher, and yet, adhering to our one and only scientific method, and remembering the necessity to struggle against the limiters, we are compelled to reply, no, it's not a limit. Perhaps in some other country it would be an upper limit, but not here. As long as there are any cubic centimeters of unbreathed air left in that compartment, even if it is beneath the upper shelves, even if it's beneath shoulders, legs, heads, the compartment is ready to take advantage of it, to take additional prisoners. One might, however, conditionally accept as the upper limit the number of unremoved corpses which has been contained in the total volume of the compartment, given the possibility of packing them in at leisure. Kornaeva traveled from Moscow in a compartment that held 30 women, most of them withered old women exiled for their religious beliefs. On arrival, all of these women except 2 were immediately put in the hospital. Nobody died in the compartment because several of the prisoners were young, well-developed, good-looking girls, arrested for going out with foreigners. These girls took it upon themselves to shame the convoy. You ought to be ashamed to transport them this way. These are your own mothers. It probably wasn't so much their moral arguments as their attractive appearance which produced a reaction in the convoy guards, and they did move several of the old women out to the punishment cell. But the punishment cell in the Stolypin car is no punishment, it is a blessing. Of 5 prisoners' compartment, 4 are used as general cells, and the 5th is set aside and divided into 2 halves. 2 narrow half compartments with 1 lower and 1 upper berth, like those the conductors have. These punishment cells serve to isolate prisoners. 3 or 4 travel in them at a time, and this gives both comfort and space. No, it is not intentionally to torture them with thirst that the exhausted and overcrowded prisoners are fed not soup but salt herring or dry smoked Caspian carp for the whole of their trip in the Stolypin car. This was exactly how it was in all the years, the 30s and the 50s, winter and summer, Siberia and the Ukraine. And it isn't even necessary to cite examples. It was not to torture them with thirst, but just you tell me what these ragamuffins were to be fed anyway while being moved around. They were not supposed to get hot meals in prisoner transport railroad cars. True, there was a kitchen in one of the Stolypin car's compartments, but that was only for the convoy. You could just give the prisoners raw grits, and you couldn't give them raw grits, and couldn't give them raw codfish either, nor could you give them canned meat because they might stuff themselves. Herring was just the thing, with a piece of bread, and what else did they need? Go ahead and take your half a herring while they are handing it out, and be glad you got it. If you're smart, you aren't going to eat that herring. Just be patient. Wait, hide it in your pocket. You can eat it at the next transit point when there is water to be had. It's worse when they issue you a wet sea of azote anchovies covered with coarse salt. You can't keep them in your pocket, so you scoop them up in the flaps of your pea jacket or in your handkerchief in the palm of your hand and eat them. They divide up these adds up anchovies on someone's pea jacket, whereas the convoy guards dump the dried carp right on the floor of a compartment. It is divided up on the benches on the prisoner's knees. Once they've given you a fish, they aren't going to hold back on the bread. And maybe they'll even throw in a bit of sugar. There are much worse things when the convoy comes over and announces, "We aren't going to be feeding you today. Nothing was issued for you." And it could very well be that nothing was actually issued. Someone in one or another prison accounting office made a mistake in the figures, and it could be that it was issued but the convoy was short on rations. After all, they aren't exactly overfed either. And so they decided to snag a bit of your bread for themselves. And in that case, to hand over half a herring by itself would seem suspicious. And of course, it is not for the purpose of intentionally torturing the prisoner, but after his herring he is neither given hot nor cold. He is given neither hot water, and he never gets that here in any case, nor even plain unboiled water. One has to understand the situation. The convoy staff, limited, some of them have to be on watch in the corridor. Some are on duty on the platform. At the train stations, they clamber all over the car, under it, on top of it, to make sure that there aren't any holes in it. Others are kept busy cleaning guns, and then, of course, there has to be time for political indoctrination and their catechism on the Articles of War. And the third shift is sleeping. They insist on their full 8 hours, for after all, the war is over. And then, to go carry water pails, it has to be hauled a long way, too. And it's insulting. So why should a Soviet soldier have to carry water like a donkey for enemies of the people? There are also times when they spend half a day hauling the Stolopin cars away out from the station in order to reshuffle or recouple the cars. It will be farther away from prying eyes, and the result is that you can't get water, even for your own Red Army mess. True, there is one way out. You can go dip up some water from the locomotive tender. It's yellow and murky, but some lubricating grease mixed in with it. But the Zeks will drink it willingly. It doesn't really matter that much anyway, since it isn't as if they could see what they're drinking in the semi-darkness of their compartment. They don't have their own window, and there isn't any light bulb either. And what light they get comes from the corridor. And there's another thing too. It takes a long time to dole out the water. The Zeks don't have their own mugs, so whoever did have one has had it taken away from him. So what it adds up to is that they have to be given the 2 government issue mugs to drink out of. And while they're drinking up, you have to keep standing there and dipping it out and dipping it out some more and handing it to them. Yes, and then 2 prisoners argue. Prisoners argue about who's to drink first. They want the healthy prisoners to drink first, and only then those with tuberculosis and prisoners, and last of all those with syphilis, just as if it wasn't going to begin all over again on the next call. First the healthy ones. But the convoy could have borne with all that, hauled the water and doled it out, if only those pigs, after slurping up the water, didn't ask to go to the toilet. So here's the way it all works out. If you don't give them water for a day, they don't ask to go to the toilet. Give them water once, they go to the toilet once. Take pity on them and give them water twice, and they just ask to go to the toilet twice. So it's pure and simple common sense. Just don't give them anything to drink. And it isn't that one is stingy about taking them to the toilet, because one wants to be stingy about the use of the toilet itself, but because taking prisoners to the toilet is irresponsible, even one might say a combat operation. It takes a long, long time for one first class and two privates. 2 guards have to be stationed on one next to the toilet door, the other in the corridor on the opposite side, so that no one so that no one tries to escape in that direction. While the private first class has to push open and then shut the door to the compartment, first to admit the returning prisoner and then to allow the next one out. The statutes permit letting out only one at a time, so that they don't try to escape and so that they can't start a rebellion. Therefore, the way it works out is that one prisoner who has to be let out to go to the toilet is holding up 30 others in his own compartment and 120 in the whole car, not to mention the convoy detail. And so the command resounds, "Come on, there, come on, get a move on, get a move on." The private first class and the soldiers keep hurrying him all the way there and back, and he hurries so fast that he stumbles, and it's as though they think he's going to steal that shithole from the state. In 1949, traveling in a dollar-pin car between Moscow and Kubashev, the one-legged German Schultz, having understood the Russian hurry-up by this time, jumped to the toilet and back on one leg while the convoy kept laughing and ordering him to go faster. During one such trip, one of the convoy guards pushed him. When he reached the platform at the end of the corridor and Schultz fell down on the floor in front of the toilet, the convoy guard went into a rage and began to beat him, while Schultz, who couldn't get up because of the blows raining down on him, crawled and crept into the dirty toilet. The rest of the convoy roared with laughter, so that the prisoner shouldn't attempt to escape during the moment he was in the toilet, and also for a fast turnaround. The door to the toilet was not closed, and the convoy guard, watching the process from the platform of the car, could encourage it. Come on now. That's plenty. That's enough for you." Sometimes the orders came before you even started. "All right, number 1 only." And that means that from the platform, they'd prevent you doing anything else. And when, of course, you couldn't wash your hands, there wasn't enough water in the tank there. There wasn't enough time either. If the prisoner even so much as touched the plunger of the washstand, the convoy guard would roar, "Don't you touch that, Lulong." And if someone happened to have soap or a towel among his belongings, he wouldn't dare take it out anyway, simply out of shame. That would really be acting like a sucker. The toilet was filthy. Quicker, and tracking back the liquid mess on his shoes, the prisoner would be shoved back into the compartment, where he would climb up over somebody's arms and shoulders, and then from the top row, his dirty shoes would dangle in the middle row and drip. When women were taken to the toilet, the statutes of the convoy service, and common sense as well, required that the toilet door be kept open. But not every convoy insisted on this, and some allowed the door to be shut. "Oh, all right, go ahead and shut it." Later on, one of the women was sent in to wash out the toilet, and the guard again had to stand right there beside her so that she didn't try to escape. And even at this fast tempo, visits to the toilet for 120 people would take more than 2 hours, more than a quarter of the entire shift of 3 convoy guards. And in spite of that, you still couldn't make them happy. In spite of that, some old sandpiper or other would begin to cry half an hour later and ask to go to the toilet. And of course,
he wouldn't be allowed to go, and then he would soil himself right there in the compartment. And once again, that meant trouble for the private first class. The prisoner had to be forced to pick it up with his hands and carry it away. So that was all there was to it. A few trips to the toilet, and that meant less water and less food too, because then they wouldn't complain of loose bowels and stink up the air. After all, how bad could it be? A man couldn't even breathe. Less water, but they had to hand out the herring anyway, just as regulations required. No water, that was a reasonable measure. No herring, that was a service crime. No one at all ever set out to torture us on purpose. The convoy's actions were quite reasonable, but like the ancient Christians, we sat there in the cage while they poured salt on our raw and bleeding tongues. Also, the prisoner transport convoys did not often deliberately, though sometimes they did, mix the thieves, Latari, and non-political offenders in with Article 58 politicals in the same compartment. But a particular situation existed. There were a great many prisoners and very few railroad cars in compartment, and time was always short, and so when there was enough time to sort them out, of the 4 compartments, one of the 4 compartments was kept for women, and if the prisoners in the other 3 were to be sorted out on one basis or another, the most logical basis would be by destination, so that it would be easier to unload them. After all, was it because Pontius Pilate wanted to humiliate him that Christ was crucified between 2 thieves? It just happened to be crucifixion day that day, and there was only one thing, and there was only one Golgotha, and time was short, and so he was numbered with the transgressors. We'll take a break there. Thank you for listening. Good night.